"I'll birth your son when I grow up," said the little girl to Mafia boss. 15 years later, a frightened child, made a wild promise on a bloody dock. 15 years later, she walks back into the lion's den. Now a fierce woman with an encrypted drive, a dead mentor, and a target on her back. A single sniper shot explodes the gala, and the most feared man in the city locks her inside his fortress, but only to protect her. She thinks he's stone cold. Secret truth. He's been her unseen guardian for years. A cruel rival sends a nursery rattle and a message. Promises come due. His right-hand man smiles like family, but someone inside is selling her out. A doctor hints the boss's greatest weakness might be a lie, and a midnight abduction dares him to come alone. If love is her only shield, and power is his only language, who breaks first? The king who can't let go, or the woman who refuses to be owned? Through the sodium vapor haze of dock lights, gunfire exploded across the shipping yard. 8-year-old Tamsin Hart froze mid-step, her worn sneakers skidding on wet concrete. The echo of shots bounced between metal containers as a stray bullet shattered a freight lamp, sending glass raining down like deadly stars. Strong hands yanked her backward as a man's body covered hers, shielding her from the spray of glass. His wool coat smelled of expensive cedar and gunpowder. "Behind the crate! Now," he ordered, his voice low and controlled. He guided her behind a steel shipping container, his movements precise despite the chaos. Tamsin's heart hammered as she peered up at him. Even in the dim light, his eyes were striking, dark amber ringed with gold, calculating yet somehow gentle as they assessed her. This was Emiliano Corsini. She'd heard dock workers whisper his name with fear and respect. "Stay down," Emile commanded, already speaking rapid Italian into a phone. Men materialized from the shadows, forming a protective perimeter as sirens wailed in the distance. Through it all, his hand remained steady on her shoulder, anchoring her in the storm of violence. When the gunfire ceased, Emile studied her properly. His gaze caught on her scraped knees, the holes in her jacket, the hollow cheeks of a child who hadn't eaten properly in days. "You're far from home, little one." "Ran away," Tamsin mumbled, shivering. Foster home wasn't nice. Something darkened in his expression. He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It smelled safe, despite belonging to a man who clearly dealt in danger. The weight of it steadied her racing thoughts. "I'll have someone take you somewhere safe," he said, already turning to leave. "Wait." The word burst from her before she could stop it. Emile paused, head tilting slightly. Tamsin's next words tumbled out in a rush of childish earnestness. "When I grow up, I'll birth your son so you're never alone." Emile went absolutely still. For a heartbeat, the entire dock seemed to hold its breath. Then his expression shifted. Surprise, something almost like wonder, before his features smoothed back to careful neutrality. But Tamsin had seen it, that brief crack in his armor. He signaled to his men, and within minutes, paramedics arrived. Emile spoke quietly with them while Tamsin was bundled into an ambulance. The emergency blanket was scratchy against her skin, but she clutched it tight, memorizing every detail of Emile's face as he stepped back into the shadows. From his vantage point, Emile watched the ambulance pull away, red lights pulsing through the misty rain. He gave precise instructions for the cleanup, no police involvement, no traces left behind. His men moved with practiced efficiency, erasing all evidence of the night's violence. Yet he lingered, following the ambulance at a distance until it reached the hospital. Through his network of contacts, he ensured she would be properly cared for this time. His final order of the night was to an anonymous foundation: track the girl, ensure her safety, but maintain absolute discretion. In the pediatric ward, Tamsin curled beneath hospital blankets that couldn't match the warmth of Emile's coat. The night's events played through her mind like a movie: the gunfire, the glass, those amber eyes that had looked at her with such unexpected gentleness. "I'll find you again, Mr. Corsini," she whispered to the sterile ceiling, the promise settling into her bones like a seed taking root. Miles away, Emile stood on his private balcony overlooking the harbor. The rain had settled into a fine mist, gilding the city lights in halos of gold. He told himself to forget the child's improbable vow, to dismiss it as the rambling of a frightened girl, yet her words echoed in his mind, stirring something he'd thought long buried beneath years of violence and control. He traced the rim of his whiskey glass, watching boats bob gently in the dark water below. The night had started like any other, a routine shipping oversight, a rival faction to be dealt with. Now he found himself haunted by scraped knees and brave eyes, by a promise that should have meant nothing. Emil had long ago accepted that certain things weren't meant for men like him. Family, legacy, the soft edges of normal life. His empire was built on blood and steel, not bedtime stories and school runs. He'd made peace with that solitude, or so he'd thought. But now a child's voice whispered through his carefully constructed walls. "So you're never alone!" The words struck at something raw and hidden, a longing he hadn't allowed himself to name. She'd seen straight through his armor with the devastating clarity of the young, naming the empty spaces he pretended didn't exist. The harbor lights blurred as he stared out into the night. He would forget this. He had to forget this. The girl would be safe. He'd make certain of that. But she needed to remain just another face in his city's crowds. It was better that way. Safer. Yet, even as he thought it, Emil knew he was lying to himself. The memory of her promise had already taken root, like a crack in foundation stone. No matter how he tried to patch it over, that fissure would remain, carrying the echo of possibility. 2008. The first scholarship letter arrived in a cream envelope, unsigned, but bearing an official foundation seal. Tamsin traced the embossed letterhead, wondering who had noticed her potential. 2009. Another foster home, another transfer. She kept the letters in a worn shoebox, along with a newspaper clipping about Emiliano Corsini's rising influence in Val Serrano's shipping industry. 2010. Her grades earned her advanced placement. The annual letter came with a note praising her aptitude for mathematics and encryption. 2012. High school graduation. She gave her valedictorian speech to an audience of none, but the next day's letter included a university acceptance and full ride. 2015, computer science major, minor in applied mathematics. The foundation covered every expense, every book. She started researching the Corsini family between classes. 2018, graduate school, under Professor Marcus Chen, who became more mentor than teacher. He recognized her talent for breaking impossible codes. 2023, 2 weeks ago. Marcus's body was found in his office, staged as a suicide. His last text to her, "Found something. Come quick." She arrived too late. Now, Thursday, 8:05 p.m. The Val Serrano Philharmonic gleamed like a jewel box, all gilt and crystal catching the evening's last light. Tamsin adjusted her forged assistant's badge, feeling the encrypted drive press against her ribs beneath her emerald wrap. 15 years of preparation had led to this moment. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her black evening gown allowing her to blend with the staff while looking polished enough to pass among guests. The charity auction's guest list was exclusive, old money, new criminals, and the thin line between them. There, at the mezzanine railing, Emiliano Corsini. Time had honed him to a deadlier edge. The boy who'd saved her had become a man who commanded fear and respect in equal measure. His tailored suit couldn't quite hide the predator's grace in his stance. He watched the room like a chess master studying pieces, amber eyes cataloging every movement below. Tamsin's heart thundered against her ribs. The drive felt heavy as lead now, weighted with Marcus's final discovery. She'd spent the last 2 weeks decoding fragments, finding threads that led to Kostya Dragunov's money laundering operation, and someone inside Corsini's organization helping him. She slipped up the curved stairs, pulse jumping when his head turned slightly, tracking her approach. In the shadowed alcove near the emergency exit, she stopped. "Mr. Corsini." He turned fully, recognition flickering across his features. The dock girl. His voice was exactly as she remembered, smooth and controlled. "You've grown. I need your help." The words tumbled out before she could craft them more carefully. "Professor Marcus Chen, my mentor. He found something. A ledger connecting Kostya Dragunov's operations to someone in your organization. They killed him for it." Emil's expression didn't change, but the temperature around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. "That's a dangerous accusation." "I have proof," she touched the hidden drive, "but I need protection to decrypt the rest. Someone's already tried to—" The crystal champagne flute in Emil's hand shattered as a bullet punched through the window behind them. In one fluid motion, he pulled her against his chest, shielding her as glass rained down. Screams erupted below. His hand closed around her wrist, grip firm but not bruising. "Move with me, now!" They slipped through the service door, Emil leading her through a maze of corridors with absolute certainty. His phone appeared in his free hand, thumb flying over keys. "Cars waiting, keep your head down." The private elevator opened silently. Emil positioned himself between her and the doors, one hand still holding her wrist, while the other disappeared beneath his jacket. The descent felt endless. They emerged into an underground garage where a black sedan idled, engine purring. Emil opened the rear door, ushered her inside, then slid in after her. The car moved before he'd fully closed the door. 817, he said to the driver. Take the tunnel route. Tamsin clutched her wrap, feeling the drive press against her palm. The sedan's interior smelled of leather and something distinctly masculine. Emil's cologne, she realized. He sat close enough that she felt the heat radiating from his body, his presence filling the space with controlled danger. Why come to me? He asked as they merged into traffic. Why not go to the police? She met his gaze steadily. Because 15 years ago, you saved my life. Because you made sure I was taken care of, even if you thought I wouldn't notice. Because promises matter. And I made you one. The clock on the dashboard read 8:22 p.m. Rain began to speckle the bulletproof glass, city lights fracturing through the drops. Emil studied her face with the same intensity he'd shown at the mezzanine, but now she saw something else beneath the calculation. A flash of the man who'd wrapped his coat around a scared child. You're not leaving my sight, he said finally, until every thread of this threat is burned to ash. The sedan cut through Val Serrano's glittering streets, tires biting wet asphalt as they headed deeper into Corsini territory. Tamsin felt the weight of the past 15 years settling between them. All the letters, all the research, all the careful steps that had led her back to this man and the promise she'd made on a rain-soaked dock. The fortress loomed against the night sky, a modernist structure of steel and glass perched on Val Serrano's northern cliffs. Floodlights swept the manicured grounds in precise patterns, cutting through the fog, rolling in from the sea below. At 8:50 p.m., the sedan pulled through 3 checkpoints before stopping at a reinforced entrance where Grayson Pike waited with 4 armed men. His scarred face betrayed no emotion as he opened Tamsin's door, but his eyes tracked every movement on the perimeter. Inside, Emil directed, his hand settling at the small of her back. Pike will process you through security. The entry protocol was methodical. A clean room first, where Tamsin surrendered her wrap and evening dress for scanning. She changed into provided clothing, soft black pants and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Next came biometrics, fingerprints, retinal scan, voice print. House rules, Grayson explained, his voice gravelly but not unkind. No unescorted outdoor access. All exterior doors are coded to your prints, but they won't open without authorized accompaniment. Tamsin nodded, noting cameras in every corner. This was a beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. Emil met them in the main hall, having changed into a black button-down and slacks that did nothing to diminish his dangerous grace. Your suite connects to my study. The security feeds are for your protection. Until we identify the shooter, you stay close. I have terms too, Tamsin said, lifting her chin. I'm not a prisoner to be handled, so I'll accept protection, but I decrypt the drive only in your study, with you present. No copies, no outside access. Something like approval flickered in Emil's eyes. Agreed. We start now. The study was massive, one wall entirely glass overlooking the churning sea. Modern art hung between built-in bookshelves, and a substantial desk dominated the space. A separate seating area held leather couches and a coffee table. By 10:06 p.m., Tamsin had booted the sandboxed laptop she'd requested. The encrypted drive hummed as she initiated her brute force program. Marcus built the ledger with layered security, she explained, fingers flying over keys. Each section needs specific passphrases tied to shipping dates and manifests. Emil set 2 cups of black coffee on the desk, then leaned against it, watching her work. When she referenced certain dates, his expression shifted minutely. He knew which schedules were Corsini operations. The first layer uses standard SQL injection points, Tamsin continued, taking a sip of coffee. But the core data is fragmented across. A sharp knock interrupted. Grayson entered with a tablet displaying Bianca Vale's breaking news site. The headline blazed above a photo of Emil carrying Tamsin from the gala. Corsini, heirs mystery woman, romance or revenge. Emil's phone rang moments later. He answered on speaker, his aunt's cultured voice filling the room. Dragunov will use her, Renata stated without preamble. The photo's already viral. You've made her a target and a potential lever against us. I'm aware, Emil replied coolly. Increase security at all. Properties. Full protocols. Already done. Keep her close. The line went dead. The house transformed around them as security tightened. Armed men patrolled in pairs, infrared sensors activated along the cliff face. Tamsin felt the pressure of unseen eyes, the weight of protection that was partly prison. She worked until her vision blurred, picking through Marcus's digital maze while Emil made calls and reviewed reports. Near midnight, she needed air. The private balcony off her suite offered a view of the Black Sea, white-capped waves visible in the security lights. At 12:17 a.m., rapid footsteps approached. Grayson appeared with a white box, which he carried directly to Emil's desk. Inside lay an elegant bouquet of white roses, and nestled in the stems, an antique silver rattle, its handle worn smooth by time. The two men exchanged loaded looks. The message was clear. Old promises, demanded payment, and someone was calling in the debt. Tamsin watched from the balcony doorway as Emil lifted the rattle, his expression hardening to granite. 15 years ago, a child had made an innocent vow. Now that vow had teeth, and they were drawing blood. The waves crashed below, a steady rhythm like a countdown. In the fortress above, pieces were moving on an unseen board. Tamsin felt the weight of the encrypted drive in her pocket, heavy with secrets that had already killed once. The night stretched ahead, full of shadows and unspoken threats, while somewhere in Valserano, a shooter waited for another chance. Grayson took up position outside her suite, his back straight, hands clasped behind him. Emil remained at his desk, the rattle gleaming dully under his office lights. The security feeds showed empty corridors, locked gates, armed men making their rounds. Safe, for now. Protected. But Tamsin knew better than most how quickly safety could shatter. She'd seen it happen on a rainy dock 15 years ago, when gunfire split the night and a stranger's body sheltered her from harm. Now she was back in his orbit, wrapped in his security, while outside forces circled like wolves. The fog continued rolling in from the sea, thick enough to obscure the bases of the floodlight towers. Somewhere in the vast house, a clock chimed the quarter hour. Tamsin touched the cool glass of the balcony door, watching her breath fog the surface. Behind her, Emil's fingers drummed once on his desk, then fell still. The night was young, and none of them would sleep easily until morning. The study's wall clock read 7:12 a.m. when Tamsin stepped inside, her shoulders stiff from dozing awkwardly on the suite's couch. Emil hadn't moved from his position at the desk, his shirt sleeves rolled to reveal corded forearms, his tie loosened but still knotted. The silver rattle sat between stacks of reports like an accusation. "Coffee?" he asked, voice graveled from the sleepless night. She nodded, accepting the steaming cup he poured from a carafe. They studied the rattle in silence, morning light catching its worn edges. The piece was clearly antique, probably European, with delicate engravings partially smoothed by decades of handling. "Back to work," Tamsin said finally, settling at her laptop. The decryption program had made progress overnight, revealing patterns in the data structure. Her fingers flew across the keys, mapping payment routes that repeated every third Thursday. "These consulting fees," she murmured. "They follow a specific schedule. The route matches internal knowledge, shipping lanes only senior management would know." Emil leaned over her shoulder, his presence both distracting and grounding, his cologne, faded after hours, mixed with coffee and gun oil. "Show me the dates." They worked through the morning, the sun climbing higher outside the cliff-face windows. At noon, while Emil took a call, Tamsin slipped away to her suite's bathroom. With steady hands, she photographed key sections of the ledger on her phone, creating backup data. The door opened behind her. "What are you doing?" Emil's voice was deadly quiet. She spun around, phone clutched to her chest. "Insurance? You need to follow security protocols." He stepped closer, filling the doorway. "No unauthorized copies." "I need autonomy," she shot back. "I'm not your prisoner." "No, you're my responsibility." Another step closer. "I made that choice 15 years ago." "I'm not that scared little girl anymore." "No." His eyes traced her face. "You're far more dangerous now." The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Tamsin became acutely aware of the bathroom's small space, his height, the heat radiating from his body. His gaze dropped to her lips. A sharp knock shattered the moment. Renata stood in the hallway, elegant in a charcoal suit. "Noon briefing," she announced. "The situation's evolved." In Emil's office, Renata outlined Dragunov's latest moves, pressure on neutral territories, whispers of new alliances. "We need to demonstrate strength," she concluded. "Tonight's sit-down with the neutral families is crucial. They need to see unity, control." "And me?" Tamsin asked. "What's my role in this theater?" "You're an asset now," Renata replied coolly. "Use that." The early afternoon brought Helene Moreau, a striking woman in her 40s who examined the graze on Tamsin's forearm with gentle efficiency. Minor abrasion, she concluded, applying antibiotic cream. Keep it clean. Something flickered in her eyes when Tamsin gave her name. Helene glanced at Emile, who watched from the doorway, and an unspoken message passed between them. Tamsin filed away the interaction for later analysis. Hours crawled by as Emile's security team prepped for the evening meeting. At 6:35 p.m., Tamsin stood before a mirror, adjusting a dark wig, while Emile changed into a fresh suit. A harsh electronic tone cut through the house. Perimeter sensors. Down, Emile ordered through his comm as red lights flashed. 2 hostiles at the southeast. Fence! Tamsin pressed against the study window, watching Emile stride across the manicured lawn. His movements were pure predator grace, each step measured. The first attacker went down with surgical precision, a disarm, a strike to the throat, a knee to the temple. The second managed to draw his weapon before Emile's elbow crushed his windpipe. She should have been horrified by the violence. Instead, she felt a disturbing relief watching him move with such controlled lethality. This was the man who'd sheltered her from bullets as a child, who'd ensured her safety from shadows for 15 years. At 7:20 p.m., they sat in the back of an armored Bentley rolling toward the neutral restaurant. Tamsin's fingers worried the edge of her borrowed cocktail dress, her other hand clenched around a flash drive containing decoded fragments of the ledger. The wig itched at her temples and the glasses felt foreign on her nose. "Stay at my side," Emile murmured, his hand covering hers. "No matter what happens in there." She studied his profile in the passing streetlights. The sharp jaw, the tiny scar near his hairline, the eyes that had haunted her memories since childhood. "I don't need protection," she whispered. "Not protection?" His thumb traced her knuckles. "Partnership." The car glided through darkening streets while inside her head, Tamsin mapped variables like chess moves. The ledger's secrets, the traitor's identity, the sniper's next attempt. Emile's touch on her skin. All pieces on a board where every choice could mean survival or destruction. Val Serrano's lights bloomed against the evening sky as they approached the restaurant district. Armed men in unmarked cars bracketed their vehicle, a silent honor guard leading them into what could be either a triumph or a trap. Tamsin straightened her spine, feeling the weight of the flash drive like a burning coal in her clutch. The private dining room at Salvatore's gleamed with old money and new tension. Crystal glasses caught lamplight like ice, fracturing light into tiny rainbows across the white tablecloths that stretched pristine and untouched across heavy oak tables. The room smelled of beeswax polish and subtle cologne, an understated luxury that spoke of generations of power. At 7:40 p.m., Emile's security detail positioned themselves with practiced efficiency. One by the door, another at the window, eyes constantly scanning for threats, while Tamsin settled beside him, the wig's dark strands brushing her shoulders and tickling her neck. The weight of it felt foreign but necessary, another layer of armor for the night ahead. The cool silk of her dress whispered against her skin as she shifted, hyper-aware of Emile's solid presence next to her, the heat of his body a stark contrast to the chill settling in her stomach. Instead of Dragunov, a single messenger arrived, thin, precise, with hands that never strayed near his jacket. His shoes made no sound on the plush carpet, his movements economical and deliberate. "Mr. Dragunov extends his deepest regrets," he began, voice like oil on silk, a practiced smoothness that set Tamsin's teeth on edge. "He proposes a more intimate meeting, 48 hours from now, to talk like family, not enemies." His smile was practiced, reptilian in its emptiness. Emile's face remained impassive, carved from stone, but Tamsin felt the subtle tension in his shoulder where it pressed against hers, the almost imperceptible tightening of muscle. His breathing remained even, controlled, but she knew he was calculating, assessing. "Interesting timing," he replied, swirling amber liquid in his glass, the ice cubes clinking softly against crystal. "Your employer seems eager to negotiate now that certain information has surfaced." Tamsin kept her expression neutral, though her pulse quickened. She folded her hands in her lap to keep from fidgeting, watching the messenger's face for any reaction. Information can be such a volatile commodity. The messenger's smile never reached his eyes, which remained cold and assessing, taking in every detail of their positioning, their reactions. Family meetings help contain such volatility. Better to discuss sensitive matters in person, don't you agree? "We'll consider the invitation." Emile's dismissal was polite but final, a velvet-wrapped steel door closing. The chill in his tone made the room temperature seem to drop several degrees. Once the messenger departed, his absence leaving a lingering unease, Emil turned to Grayson. The security chief stood at attention, his scarred hands clasped behind his back. Triple surveillance, full spectrum coverage. I want to know if a bird lands wrong on our perimeter. Nothing moves without our eyes on it. Grayson nodded, his face grim. Already initiated, enhanced protocols, sir. We've got thermal imaging active and additional men on rotation. By 8:30 p.m., they were back in Emil's study, the rich smell of leather and old books filling the air. Tamsin's fingers flew across the keyboard, while lines of code reflected in her glasses. The green glow of the screen cast shadows across her concentrated face as she navigated through digital labyrinths. The ledger's second encryption layer cracked with a soft chime that broke the tense silence. There! She pointed to the screen, excitement and dread mingling in her voice. Regular payments routed through shell companies, but look at the pattern. See how they align with dates. These transfers only happened when specific routes were compromised, routes that only senior staff would know. Her finger traced across the screen, following the digital breadcrumbs. Her finger traced the data flow to a name that made Emil go still. Benedict Rinaldi, his consigliere of 12 years, the man who had access to everything, who knew all the family's secrets and vulnerabilities. Impossible. Emil's jaw set like granite, a muscle twitching in his cheek, his hands flattened on the desk, knuckles whitening. Benedict's loyalty is absolute. He was there when my father died, when I took over. He's guided every major decision. Data doesn't lie, Tamsin countered, though her voice softened at the raw disbelief in his eyes. She pointed again at the screen where the numbers formed an undeniable pattern. These patterns, the timing of these transfers, it's too precise to be coincidence. Look at these dates. They match exactly with the compromised shipments. Could be manufactured. His voice held Winter's edge, sharp enough to cut. Benedict has given everything to this family. There must be another explanation. But doubt had crept in, a shadow behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. The tension coiled too tight, a spring ready to snap. Tamsin pushed away from the desk, needing air, needing space from the suffocating weight of what they'd discovered. In the hallway, she pressed her forehead against cool marble, trying to steady her racing thoughts. The cold stone grounded her as she took deep breaths, fighting the rising panic. If Benedict was the traitor, no one was safe. No one could be trusted. At 9:10 p.m., the night exploded. Flashbangs lit the eastern ridge like artificial lightning, turning night to blinding day. The boom echoed across the grounds, rattling windows and setting car alarms wailing in the distance. Suppressed gunfire peppered the fortress walls with deadly precision, the muted thwacks punctuated by the ping of ricochets and the crunch of breaking glass. Through windows, Tamsin glimpsed dark figures moving with military coordination, their bodies low, weapons raised, advancing in practice formation. East Wing breach! Grayson's voice crackled through comms, the static unable to mask his controlled urgency. Multiple hostiles, professional grade, moving in 3-man teams, night vision equipped. Emil's orders cut sharp and clear through the chaos. Lock down the study! Tamsin, deadbolt protocol now! His voice remained steady, but his eyes held controlled fury as he assessed escape routes. Her foster home years flashed back. Fire drills, lockdowns, the constant preparation for crisis. The smell of institutional disinfectant, the sound of running feet, the practiced movements of children who knew danger was always one misstep away. She slammed the study's reinforced door with practiced efficiency, activated the electronic locks with trembling fingers, and dragged a heavy mahogany desk against the entrance, muscles straining with the effort. The comm unit in her ear hissed with combat chatter, voices terse and professional. 2 down in the courtyard, west approach still secure. Flanking movement on the north side. They're trying to split our response. Pike, check your 6. Movement behind the hedgerow. Tamsin crouched behind Emil's desk, clutching her phone with the copied ledger data, the cold metal case digging into her palm. Her heart hammered against her ribs as adrenaline flooded her system. Through the walls came muffled impacts, running footsteps, the controlled violence of close-quarters combat. A distant crash, the sound of breaking glass, someone shouting orders. Her breath came in shallow pants as she listened to the symphony of violence surrounding her. At 9:27 p.m., silence fell, sudden and almost more terrifying than the chaos. Clear, Grayson reported, his voice rough from exertion. 3 unconscious, 1 contained for questioning. Minimal structural damage. Perimeter being resecured now. The study door opened to Emil's override code. the heavy desk scraping across hardwood as security pushed it aside. He swept in, suit jacket discarded, shirt sleeve torn at the shoulder, revealing a thin scratch beneath. A smear of someone else's blood marked his collar, vivid red against pristine white. His hands trembled slightly as they cupped her face, fingers gentle as they checked for injuries, eyes scanning her with desperate intensity. "I'm okay," she whispered, struck by the raw concern in his usually controlled expression. The mask had slipped, revealing something vulnerable beneath the power. "I followed protocol, just like you said." His thumb brushed her cheekbone, lingering there as though reassuring himself of her solidity. "You did well." The words came rough, revealing more than his careful mask typically allowed. For a moment, they breathed together in the small space, the shared danger creating an intimacy neither had anticipated. They moved to the security hub, where Grayson's team had secured the captured attacker. Banks of monitors showed every angle of the property, some displaying static where cameras had been disabled. The captive sat zip-tied to a steel chair, his expensive tactical gear suggesting serious backing. The fabric alone cost more than most people made in a month, the equipment military grade and customized. At 10:00 p.m., under questioning, he broke. "The woman is the key," he whispered, blood trickling from his split lip, pooling at the corner of his mouth. His eyes darted between Emil and Tamsin, calculating even in defeat. "Your house is already compromised. The mole's been paid. They'll deliver her, one way or another. It's just a matter of time." Emil's expression hardened to marble, all earlier vulnerability locked away behind a wall of controlled rage. "Benedict," he commanded through comms, each syllable precise and cutting. "Full internal audit at dawn. Every account, every contact, every shadow. Nothing gets overlooked." "Of course, sir." Benedict's cultured voice came smooth and immediate through the speaker, as reliable as always. "I'll prepare the team. Rest assured, we'll find whoever's responsible." The perfect response from the perfect consigliere, or the perfect performance from a traitor who'd had years to practice his role. In the following hour, Emil oversaw increased security measures, positioning men at key points, changing access codes, establishing new communication protocols. Tamsin processed the implications of the attack, her mind racing through possibilities while she helped cross-reference security footage. The weight of the day pressed down on her shoulders, exhaustion battling with hypervigilance. Just before midnight, Emil stationed himself in a chair outside her suite, jacket draped over his shoulder holster, his profile severe in the dim hallway lighting. The gun at his side gleamed dully, a deadly promise. "You don't have to stay," she said from her doorway, leaning against the frame, too tired to maintain perfect posture, but too wired to truly relax. "Your security team is everywhere. I'll be fine." "I do." His eyes met hers, dark with something deeper than duty, an intensity that made her breath catch. "Sleep. I'll be here." The simple declaration carried weight, a promise that transcended professional obligation. Tamsin closed her door, listening to him settle into position, the soft creak of the chair, the subtle sounds of a predator making his lair. Outside her windows, armed men patrolled the grounds in precise patterns, while security lights swept the perimeter in steady rhythm, cutting through darkness with clinical precision. She lay in bed fully dressed, one hand near the panic button Emil had given her, the other clutching her phone, her mind racing through encryption patterns and payment trails that all led to an impossible betrayal, connecting dots that formed a picture she didn't want to see. In the hallway, Emil kept his vigil, weapon within easy reach, body alert despite the late hour. He replayed the captured man's words against 12 years of Benedict's faithful service, weighing loyalty against evidence, heart against data. The night stretched dark and vigilant around the fortress, full of shadows and uncertainty, while somewhere in the city, a traitor moved pieces on a board whose stakes had just become lethal, and the woman behind the door had become the most valuable piece in the game. Sunlight crept across the Mediterranean at 5:45 a.m., painting the water in shades of amber and rose. Tamsin blinked awake, her neck stiff from sleeping fully dressed. When she eased her door open, the sight stopped her breath. Emil dozed in the hallway chair, suit jacket draped over the arm, shoulder holster visible against his white shirt. His face had softened in sleep, though one hand still rested near his weapon. The image twisted something in her chest. This lethal man who killed without hesitation, yet stationed himself as her guardian through the night. She padded past him to splash water on her face, and when she returned, he was alert and standing, no trace of fatigue in his posture. "Sleep well?" His voice carried its usual control, but something warmer lingered beneath. Better than expected, she gestured to the chair. Though probably better than you. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. I've had worse posts. Breakfast arrived in the private dining room. Strong coffee, fresh fruit, warm, bread. They ate in comfortable quiet until Helen appeared, clipboard in hand. The doctor drew Emil aside, their voices too low to catch. When he returned to the table, something had shifted in his expression. Walk with me? He asked, offering his hand. She took it, noting how his fingers closed careful but firm around hers. He led her to his study, now bathed in morning light. At 7:10 a.m., he closed the door and turned to face her. Helene reminded me that honesty matters more than armor. He moved to the window, shoulders tense. 15 years ago, I took an ambush meant for my father. The wounds. He paused. The surgeon said children wouldn't be possible. I've lived with that sentence since. Tamsin heard the words, felt them echo against her childhood promise. The pain in his voice drew her across the room. She touched his arm, and he turned to meet her eyes. I need boundaries, she said softly. Equal partners, full consent, no lies between us. Yes. The word came immediate, almost reverent. Always yes to that. She rose on her toes as he bent down, their first kiss gentle despite the heat building beneath. His hands framed her face, while hers gripped his shirt, neither pushing faster than the other wanted. When they pulled back by mutual choice, his eyes had darkened, but his touch stayed respectful. They returned to work with renewed focus, the promise of more simmering between them. Tamsin attacked the ledger's final encryption, while Emil made calls, coordinating increased security. By midday, the last layer cracked. Here! She pointed to a pattern of meetings and payments. Benedict's signature is all over this. Look at these timestamps. He's the only one with access to these specific routes and schedules. Emil studied the screen, jaw tight. We need proof that will hold in front of the family council. I have an idea. Tamsin pulled up the social calendar. The masquerade tonight at Palazzo Verde. Public enough to prevent obvious moves, controlled enough for surveillance. If we feed Benedict specific information, we can track how it travels. Emil nodded. Renata can arrange the guest list, position our people at all exits. The afternoon blurred with preparation. Security teams mapped camera angles and escape routes. Renata coordinated with the venue, while Grayson's men established a protective perimeter. At 5:30 p.m., Tamsin found herself in the fortress dressing room, stepping into a gown of midnight silk. Renata appeared behind her, elegant fingers gathering Tamsin's hair into an intricate updo. The throne burns those who touch it, she said, voice neutral but not unkind. Are you prepared for that heat? I choose the man, Tamsin answered, not the crown. Renata secured the last pin, then helped Tamsin settle a simple black mask over her eyes. In the mirror, she looked like a shadow, given form, dangerous and beautiful. At 6:05 p.m., Renata guided her to the grand staircase. Emil waited at the bottom, devastating in black tie and a matching mask that emphasized his predator's grace. His eyes tracked her descent, heat and tenderness warring in his gaze. He offered his arm when she reached him. Ready? She laid her hand in the crook of his elbow, feeling the weapon concealed beneath fine wool. Together. Around them, security teams moved into position while surveillance feeds flickered to life in the command center. Upstairs, Benedict would be preparing his own mask, unaware that every exit and shadow had eyes. The masquerade waited ahead, a dance of secrets where one false step could shatter everything. Emil's hand covered hers, steady and warm. Stay close to me tonight. Always, she promised, and meant it beyond the mission, beyond the danger. His fingers tightened in acknowledgement as they moved toward the waiting car, united in purpose and in the deeper current flowing between them. The fortress gates opened, steel sliding silent on steel. Behind her mask, Tamsin felt the dual nature of the moment, the tactical chess game they must play, and the personal truth they'd crossed together. Emil helped her into the car with lethal grace, his touch lingering as he settled beside her. As they pulled away from the fortress, the setting sun painted the sea in shades of fire, a fitting backdrop for the night of masks and revelations ahead. The chandeliers at Hotel Verde scattered light like broken mirrors across the ballroom's polished floor. At 8:10 p.m., Emil guided Tamsin through the entrance, his hand protective at her lower back. Their masks caught the golden glow. His a sleek black design that emphasized his sharp cheekbones. Hers, a delicate piece that made her eyes seem deeper, mysterious. Grayson positioned himself near a marble column, earpiece barely visible. His team melted into the crowd, suits and evening wear concealing tactical gear, weapons invisible under tailored lines. The music swelled, a jazz quartet making the Art Deco walls vibrate with the bass notes. "Remember," Emile murmured, lips close to her ear. "Stay where I can see you." Tamsin adjusted her ear mic, disguised as a pearl drop earring. "I remember." She stepped away, playing her role of curious newcomer while tracking the subtle movements of security teams through the crowd. Emile prowled the edges of the room like a caged predator in designer wool. His attention never wavered as she drifted between conversations, noting which guests tensed at her approach. Through her earpiece, she heard his quiet observations mixing with Grayson's status reports. The ballroom grew warmer as more guests arrived. Champagne flowed, masks glittered, and beneath the surface glamour, an invisible web of surveillance tightened. At 8:42 p.m., Benedict emerged from the crowd. His silver mask caught the light as he bowed slightly. "Miss Hart," his voice carried practiced charm. "Might I have a moment? There's an administrative matter that requires your expertise." Tamsin met Emile's eyes. Across the room saw his slight nod. "Of course." The next few minutes passed in careful conversation, Benedict probing for information while she fed him precisely crafted half-truths. His polished manner never slipped, but she caught the calculated gleam behind his mask when she mentioned certain shipping routes. At 8:49 p.m., she excused herself and moved toward the west corridor. Emile materialized from the shadows, drawing her into an alcove hidden by heavy drapes. His hands cupped her face as he kissed her, deep, desperate, full of promise. "Be careful," he breathed against her mouth. "I will." She straightened his tie, pulse racing. "See you soon." Back on the dance floor, she felt the ghost of his touch as she resumed her position. Benedict watched her return, his attention sharp behind his pleasant smile. The trap was set. Now they only needed him to spring it. Time stretched like honey until 9:15 p.m., when Benedict approached again. "The noise is rather overwhelming. Perhaps we could continue our discussion somewhere quieter?" He gestured toward a service corridor. "There's a more private exit this way." Tamsin followed, counting steps, tracking turns. Through her earpiece, she heard Emile's teams moving into position. The service door opened onto a loading dock where 3 men in dark clothes waited. Grayson burst from the shadows, but one attacker spun with unnatural speed. Metal flashed, a blade catching chandelier light through the open door. Grayson grunted, crimson blooming at his side. Rough hands grabbed Tamsin. She fought, but they were ready for resistance. A van's side door slid open with an oiled whisper. She managed one shout before they forced her inside, the music from the ballroom swallowing her voice. Emile arrived in time to see the van's taillights. He caught Grayson as the security chief swayed, pressing hard against the knife wound. "Status!" "Through and through," Grayson gritted out. "I'll live!" Emile's free hand went to his earpiece. "All units. Black van heading east on Marina Boulevard, plate Victor Echo 749. Track, but do not engage." He shifted to support more of Grayson's weight. "Renata, lock down the hotel. Full sweep. No one leaves until we process every surface Benedict touched." Inside, the masquerade continued its glittering dance, oblivious to the violence at its edges. The jazz quartet started another song while blood dripped onto imported marble. Emile watched the van disappear into traffic, his expression carved from stone. "Sir?" One of Grayson's men approached with a medical kit. "Get him patched up." Emile's voice went flat, emptied of everything but lethal purpose. "Then ready the convoy. We end this tonight." The city lights blurred into streams of color, reflecting off the masks of guests still arriving, unaware of the real dance about to begin. Behind the hotel, medics worked on Grayson while Emile's security teams moved with practiced efficiency, sealing exits and gathering evidence. At 9:28 p.m., the last trace of the van vanished around a corner, leaving only the echo of tires on wet asphalt and the weight of Emile's vow hanging in the air. The night spilled out before them like spilled ink, full of shadows and secrets yet to be revealed. Renata's people photographed fingerprints while tactical teams checked surveillance feeds. Through it all, Emile stood at the loading dock's edge, his mask now a war flag, while his men prepared for the hunt that would paint the darkness red. The van lurched through another turn at 9:38 p.m., sending Tamsin against the metal wall. Her bound wrists ached, but she kept her breathing steady, focusing on the hairpin tucked in her sleeve. Years of foster homes had taught her to always have an escape plan. Now she just needed the right moment. "The old bathhouse is perfect," one kidnapper muttered. "Nobody's been there since the city condemned it." "Shut up!" another hissed. "She's listening." Tamsin was indeed listening, counting every turn. Left at what felt like Marina Boulevard. Right onto Harrison. The subtle incline told her they were heading toward the abandoned industrial district. Each traffic light became another point on her mental map. Through the van's tiny windows, fragments of the city blurred past. A neon hotel sign, the chrome glint of the financial district, the old water tower with its distinctive silhouette. She stored every detail, building a breadcrumb trail in reverse. Meanwhile, across town at 9:51 p.m., Bianca Vale's phone chimed. The reporter was working late at her desk, chasing another story entirely when the email arrived. The sender made her sit up straight. Professor James Chen. But Chen had been dead for 2 weeks. "Clever girl," Bianca whispered, opening the attachment. The ledger fragments were carefully selected, enough to prove criminal activity without revealing the full scope. The message was equally precise. Publish these connections between Dragunov's shell companies and certain city contracts, and the regulatory board would have no choice but to investigate. Bianca's fingers flew across her keyboard, cross-referencing dates and names. This was exactly the kind of insurance policy she'd have arranged herself. Back in the van, Tamsin felt them descending toward the waterfront. The air changed, becoming heavy with salt and decay. At 10:07 p.m., they rolled to a stop. The door scraped open, revealing the bathhouse's crumbling Art Deco facade. White tiles had turned gray with age, and salt air had eaten through the decorative metalwork. Kostya Dragunov waited in the entrance, his silver hair catching the security lights. He was older than Tamsin expected, with aristocratic features and eyes like frozen lake water. "Miss Hart?" His accent was subtle, refined. "Welcome to my humble temporary accommodation." 2 men guided her inside, past pools filmed with algae and walls stripped to concrete. Their footsteps echoed in the vast space. Dragunov led them to what had once been a private treatment room, now transformed into an improvised office. With theatrical precision, he placed the antique rattle in her lap. The silver was tarnished, but the tiny bells still chimed softly. "Such a sweet promise you made to Emile. Shall we send him your final lullaby?" Behind him, Benedict Rinaldi paced like a caged animal. His usual polish had cracked, revealing raw nerves beneath. "This wasn't supposed to. I never meant." "Quiet," Dragunov snapped, then softer. "Tell her, Benedict. Tell her why you serve me now instead of your precious Emile." Benedict's shoulders slumped. 3 years ago, there was an accident. A civilian woman died during an operation I was supervising. Dragunov has proof it wasn't an accident at all. And now you'll help him destroy everything you built? Tamsin kept her voice steady, buying seconds. The hairpin was almost in position. "I can help," she offered, watching Dragunov's reaction. "The ledger's final encryption, I'll decode it. Just show mercy." Dragunov's smile never reached his eyes. "Ah, but mercy is such a rare commodity in our world." He checked his watch. 10:20 p.m. "Time to call your protector." A laptop was opened, an encrypted connection established. One of Dragunov's men zip-tied Tamsin to a rusted chair, while another adjusted a single bulb overhead. The harsh light turned everything beyond its circle into threatening shadow. The camera's red light blinked to life, steady as a pulse. Dragunov leaned into frame, his voice carrying the soft menace of absolute certainty. "Come alone, Emile. For her sake." Tamsin stared directly into the camera, willing Emile to see past her fear to the clues she'd gathered. The bathhouse's location, the route she'd mapped, the hairpin she'd worked free, now hidden against her palm. In the shadows, Benedict watched with haunted eyes while Dragunov's men took up positions around the room. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, marking time like a countdown. The camera kept blinking, red light reflecting off the pool's murky surface, while Tamsin tested her bonds and waited for her moment. The rattle sat in her lap, its tarnished surface catching the overhead light. Such a small thing to carry so much weight. A child's promise, a killer's taunt, a reminder of everything at stake. Outside, waves lapped at the building's foundation, and somewhere in the city, Emile was already moving while Bianca's fingers hovered over her keyboard, ready to unleash truth like a weapon. Inside the bathhouse, surrounded by enemies and decay, Tamsin kept her breathing steady and her mind sharp. She had survived foster homes and loss and betrayal. She would survive this too. The camera's red eye kept blinking, marking each second as the night's final act prepared to unfold. Emil's knuckles whitened as he gripped the war room table, his eyes fixed on the video feed. Tamsin sat under harsh light, bound but unbroken. Dragunov's voice dripped with satisfaction. "Come alone, Emil, for her sake!" The feed cut to black at 10:22 p.m. "You can't seriously consider—" Renata started. Emil's look silenced her. With precise movements, he removed his tracker and placed it on the table. "Lock down the house. Full protocol." "Sir," Grayson stepped forward, fresh bandage visible beneath his tactical vest. "Let me position teams." "You protect Renata. That's an order." Emil's voice left no room for argument. He selected a matte black Sig Sauer and a ceramic blade, tucking smoke charges into his jacket. "No one follows." The cliffside service tunnel was narrow, carved through living rock decades ago. Emil moved with controlled urgency, each step purposeful. The tunnel air grew saltier as he descended toward sea level. Behind him, the fortress hummed with contained tension as Grayson implemented lockdown protocols. At 10:40 p.m., phones throughout the city lit up with Bianca's breaking story. Payment trails, shell companies, a web of murders, all connecting to an unnamed Corsini insider. Emil's phone buzzed with the notification, but he didn't break stride. Public pressure would serve its purpose without his attention. The tunnel opened to a hidden cove at 10:47 p.m. Emil ghosted through shadows, staying low against weathered stone. The bathhouse loomed ahead, its once grand architecture now a skeleton of rust and salt-eaten concrete. He circled the perimeter, noting camera positions and guard patterns. 2 men at the main entrance, 3 patrolling the grounds. Standard-issue weapons, professional stance. Hired muscle, not zealots. Emil timed their rotations, mapping their blind spots. A drain pipe offered access to the roof, where decades-old skylights waited like hungry mouths. At 10:58 p.m., he began his approach. The wet brick could have betrayed him with a single misplaced step, but Emil moved like water, like shadow. Years of training merged with raw instinct as he climbed, using minimal handholds to reach the roof. Inside, Tamsin worked steadily at her restraints. The hairpin scraped against metal, each tiny movement disguised by her steady stream of questions to Benedict. "About that irregularity you mentioned, was it in the shipping manifests?" Benedict's composure had completely unraveled. He paced, shooting nervous glances at Dragunov. "The manifests, yes, certain discrepancies." "In the dating system," Tamsin pressed, feeling the cuff loosen fractionally, "or the routing codes?" The conversation drew Benedict closer, his need to explain overriding caution. Tamsin noted how his eyes kept darting to Dragunov's jacket pocket. "The routing was perfect," Benedict said. "That's what made it suspicious." "Perfect like the routes only someone inside would know." Tamsin kept her voice casual, even as her heart raced. Benedict's flinch confirmed her suspicion about the pocket. The external drive had to be there. Dragunov interrupted at 11:06 p.m., moving to the laptop. "Enough chat. Emil should be arriving soon." On the roof, Emil positioned himself above the central skylight. Through grimy glass, he could see Tamsin's dark hair shining under the single bulb. 2 guards flanked her, another by the door. Dragunov stood at a makeshift desk, while Benedict hovered between groups like a lost ghost. The smoke charge felt heavy in Emil's palm. He checked his watch. 11:12 p.m. Time contracted to a single point of focus. Glass shattered. Smoke billowed. The overhead light exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the room into chaos. Through the darkness, Dragunov's voice rose in fury. "Lights! Get me lights!" Tamsin ducked her head against the smoke, already working her loosened restraint. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but her hands remained steady. Around her, boots scrambled on wet tile, and voices shouted in confusion. Benedict's panicked breathing was audible as he scrambled for cover. The smoke thickened, turning the single bulb's dying glow into a useless haze. Metal clicked against metal as Dragunov's men drew weapons, their professional calm fracturing under the assault. Through the skylights, dark shapes moved against darker sky. Water dripped steadily somewhere in the shadows, counting seconds like a metronome. The smoke curled through the vast space, transforming familiar shapes into threatening silhouettes. Dragunov's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with command. "Hold positions! Watch the doors!" But the darkness had already become Emil's weapon, and the night was far from over. In the wan emergency lighting, Tamsin felt rather than saw the currents of movement around her. The hairpin was slick in her palm as she worked it against the cuff's mechanism. Every sense strained for signals through the smoke, footsteps, breathing, the whisper of fabric against fabric. The bathhouse's decaying grandeur became a maze of shadows and echo, where every drip could be a footstep and every shadow could hide death. Guards bumped into columns, their curses bouncing off tiled walls. The smoke transformed the space into an underworld of shifting shapes and muffled sounds. Benedict's ragged breathing grew closer, then farther, as he searched for solid walls in the chaos. Dragunov barked orders in Russian, his composure cracking. Through it all, Tamsin kept working the lock, measuring each breath, ready for whatever came next. The smoke charge had done more than blind. It had shattered the illusion of control. Now the night belonged to Emil, and in the darkness, the hunter had become the hunted. The smoke-filled bathhouse erupted into controlled chaos at precisely 11:12 p.m. Emil dropped through the shattered skylight, his descent silent as falling snow. 2 guards never saw him coming. One moment standing, the next crumpled without a sound. His blade moved like quicksilver, precise and lethal. Tamsin felt the final pin given her cuff. Freedom coursed through her veins as she swung the loose restraint hard, metal connecting with her guard's kneecap. The crack echoed off tile as he buckled, cursing. She rolled sideways, away from grasping hands. Emil materialized through the smoke like a vengeful spirit. His blade flashed once, severing her remaining bonds. Strong hands gripped her waist, yanking her behind a massive tiled column as bullets peppered their previous position. Porcelain fragments exploded like deadly confetti. "The walkway," Tamsin whispered, pressing close to Emil's side. Her fingers traced a path in the air, indicating the iron-railed overlook where Dragunov had positioned himself. "Load-bearing. He'll use it to escape." Emil's slight nod was all business, but his hand lingered protectively at her waist before he moved. He flowed through the smoke like shadow given form, using the chaos as cover. Tamsin spotted a phone, dropped by one of the downed guards. She lunged for it, fingers flying over the screen to trigger an emergency ping. Bianca's contact at the city desk would trace it instantly. Location services didn't lie. "He promised!" Benedict's voice cracked through the din, high with panic. "You said you'd spare me if I delivered her." He stumbled between shooters, hands raised, desperation making him clumsy. Dragunov's response was cold steel pressed to Benedict's ribs. "Plans change." The barrel dug deeper, making Benedict whimper. The sharp report of gunfire preceded Emil's grunt of pain. Tamsin's heart stopped as he staggered, one hand pressed to his chest. She reached him in 3 desperate strides, dragging him behind a partition wall. Her fingers trembled as they searched for blood, found only the dented plate of his vest. "Breathe," she commanded, helping him straighten. His spare blade sat heavy in her palm as she pressed it into his hand. Their eyes met in the dim light, volumes passing without words. Sirens began to wail at 11:26 p.m., distant but growing closer. Bianca's leaked documents had done their job. Police were converging on the district. The bathhouse's vast space amplified the sound until it seemed to come from all directions. Dragunov snarled something in Russian, using Benedict as a human shield as he backed toward the service corridor. The consigliere's face was a mask of terror, his usual polish shattered completely. Emil raised his weapon, then lowered it with a curse. Benedict's body blocked any clean shot, and Dragunov knew it. They could only watch as he disappeared into the darkness of the back hall. The next 5 minutes were a blur of tactical retreat. Emil and Tamsin moved in perfect sync, covering each other's blind spots as they fought their way to the exit. The remaining guards were more focused on escape than pursuit, scattering like roaches before the approaching sirens. Cold night air hit their faces at 11:31 p.m. as they burst through a side door. Their labored breathing created clouds in the frigid air. Down the street, taillights vanished around a corner, heading toward the shipyard district. "We finish this tomorrow," Emil said quietly, his voice rough from smoke. Tamsin reached into her pocket, fingers closing around the external drive she'd managed to lift during the chaos. The hard edge of it felt like victory, however temporary. She'd seen her chance when Dragunov was distracted by Benedict's panic, a quick sleight of hand made possible by years of survival skills. The night wasn't silent. Sirens still wailed, growing closer, and distant shouts echoed from the bathhouse as the last occupants fled. But in their small bubble of space, everything narrowed to the sound of their breathing slowly steadying, the warmth of Emil's body next to hers, and the weight of the drive that might finally end this. Steam rose from the old building's vents, creating ghostly patterns in the moonlight. Water dripped from broken pipes, the steady plink-plink keeping time like a metronome. Their footsteps crunched on broken glass and old tiles as they moved away from the scene. Emil kept one hand at the small of Tamsin's back, guiding her through shadows toward where he'd hidden a backup vehicle. His other hand never left his weapon. Even now, He was scanning rooflines, checking corners, protecting them both. The city spread out below them, a maze of lights and darkness. Somewhere in that labyrinth, Dragunov was already plotting his next move. But for now, they had the drive. They had each other, and they had survived. The rest would wait for tomorrow. The bathhouse receded behind them, its broken windows staring like blind eyes into the night. Police lights began to flash at the end of the street, red and blue painting the wet pavement. Emil and Tamsin melted into the shadows of an alley, leaving chaos in their wake. The night air cleared the last of the smoke from their lungs, replacing it with the familiar smell of the city. Salt water, diesel, wet stone. Their footsteps synchronized naturally as they moved through the darkness, two people who had learned to trust each other's rhythms in the midst of danger. The drive sat heavy in Tamsin's pocket, a small weight that carried enormous consequences. She could feel Emil's presence beside her, solid and reassuring as they made their way through the sleeping city. Behind them, sirens continued to wail, but that was someone else's problem now. Morning light streamed through the fortress windows at 8:05 a.m. as Helene Moreau pressed careful fingers against Emil's ribcage. He stood stoically in the medical suite, shoulders rigid as she documented the bruising that spread like watercolors across his skin. "Deep breath," she instructed, monitoring his reaction. When he winced, she made a note on her tablet. "We need proper scans. That impact could have cracked something." Renata entered with silent grace, tablet in hand. Her presence commanded attention, even in the sterile medical space. "We have a narrow window," she said, eyes sharp. "Dragunov's network is destabilizing, but he still has reach. Do we strike now while he's wounded, or clean house first?" Emil's voice was steel. "Both. Parallel tracks. Start the internal sweep while we hunt him down." "The risk," Renata began. "Is necessary," Emil finished. "We end this today." Helene cleared her throat pointedly, gesturing to the X-ray order on her screen. Emil's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. The doctor's authority was one of the few he truly respected. At 9 a.m., as Emil buttoned his shirt, Helene pulled his old medical file on her tablet. "About your previous injury," she said carefully. "I'd like to revisit the sterility diagnosis. The original assessment seems incomplete." Emil's hands stilled on the buttons. "There's no time for this. A simple blood panel. The courier arrives at noon." Helene's tone brooked no argument. "Medical facts matter, especially assumptions we've lived with for years." Across the fortress, at 10:15 a.m., Tamsin sat in Emil's study, damp hair falling around her shoulders. She wore borrowed clothes, soft gray sweater, dark jeans, while her fingers flew across the keyboard. The external drive's encryption fell away layer by layer. "Got it," she breathed as payment records and coordinates filled the screen. She spread a detailed shipyard map across Emil's desk, marking locations while her secure chat with Bianca pinged steadily. "Bianca's sources say movement at berths 4 and 7, she reported, placing markers. "And Emil, about Benedict. If we can separate him from Dragunov, he might flip. The evidence could end this cleanly." Emil studied the map, one hand resting near hers. The man chose his side. "He chose wrong under pressure. That makes him useful." Tamsin met his gaze steadily. "One chance to cooperate could save lives." They rolled out at 12:32 p.m. in armored SUVs. Renata worked her phone from the command center, leveraging political pressure and media coverage. Grayson led the advance team in the first vehicle, communication gear humming. In the second SUV, Emil and Tamsin sat close. The vehicle smelled of leather and gun oil. Their clasped hands rested between them, neither speaking as the city blurred past. His thumb traced circles on her skin, a quiet promise in the calm before violence. Tamsin watched his profile, memorizing the planes of his face in the shifting light. The man who had saved her twice now, first as a child and again as a woman. The man who defied medical verdicts and criminal empires to keep his word. The shipyard erupted at 1:06 p.m. Gunfire cracked across concrete and steel. Orders echoed between shipping containers as Grayson's team moved with precision. Dragunov's men scattered, some firing back while others ran for the boats. "The dry dock," Grayson's voice crackled through comms. "He's heading for the launch!" They spotted Dragunov sprinting across the pier, Benedict stumbling behind him. Bianca's voice cut through their earpieces. "Broadcasting live from the Val Serrano shipyard, where sources confirm the civilian death. Linked to Benedict Rinaldi occurred in this very location." Benedict froze, color draining from his face as his past echoed across the docks. His gun wavered, then swung toward Dragunov's men, the betrayal they'd counted on, delivered by a man with nothing left to lose. Shots rang out. Men fell. Emil moved like a shadow through the chaos, each step purposeful. At 1:19 p.m., Dragunov's knee shattered under Emil's bullet. He sprawled on the concrete as police sirens wailed closer. Benedict dropped his weapon, hands shaking. Emil approached him with cold grace, speaking low enough that only Tamsin, standing nearby, could hear. "You live, but you leave tonight with nothing but shame for company. Break this oath and the next bullet finds your heart." Tamsin watched Benedict nod brokenly, already a ghost. She turned to the water, letting the salt air fill her lungs. The harbor stretched before her, container ships and cranes stark against the sky. For the first time since her mentor's death, since childhood really, the city felt like somewhere she could plant roots and grow strong. The sea chewed at the pilings below, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Behind her, justice and consequences played out in efficient movements. Emil's men secured the scene, radios crackled, evidence was documented. The machinery of power shifted and realigned. But here at the water's edge, Tamsin found a moment of peace. The same water she'd seen as a terrified child now reflected a woman who had helped reshape the city's underworld, who had kept her promise, though not in the way her 8-year-old self had imagined. The breeze carried diesel fumes and brine, the eternal perfume of ports everywhere. Gulls wheeled overhead, unconcerned with the human drama below. And piece by piece, like a puzzle finally solved, Tamsin felt the last of her old fears dissolve into the endless blue horizon. At 3:10 p.m., salt-laden wind whistled through the fortress chapel's ancient stone walls. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, casting long shadows across the worn flagstones. Emil stood before Tamsin in this sacred space carved into the cliff face, his usual armor of authority stripped away. His voice was quiet but firm. "You've fulfilled your childhood promise 100 times over. You're free to walk away, start fresh anywhere you choose. Or," he took a measured breath, "stay, not as a duty or debt, but on your terms." Tamsin studied him in the chapel's diffused light, the dangerous man who had saved her twice, who commanded an empire but trembled at her touch, who offered power as an equal share, not a cage. "I choose you," she said clearly. "Not the throne or the fortress, just you." Relief softened his eyes as he closed the distance between them. They stood before the chapel's simple altar, crafting vows more binding than any formal ceremony. "Honesty," Tamsin began. "No strategic omissions, no protected secrets." "Agreed." Emil's fingers brushed her wrist. "Your safety, above all else, but never at the cost of your freedom. Equal say in decisions that affect us both. I won't be a pretty ornament or a protected prize." "Never." His voice roughened. "You'll have full access, equal authority. The guard will answer to both of us." They sealed these private promises with a kiss that held heat and tenderness both. His hands framed her face with reverent care, mindful of bruises from the shipyard fight. She pressed closer, tasting coffee and gunpowder and truth on his lips. They parted slowly, saving deeper passion for when they weren't both exhausted and aching. The fortress hummed with activity as afternoon faded. Reports flowed in, positions were secured, and a new order took shape. But at 5:30 p.m., everything paused as Helene strode into Emil's office with medical results in hand. "The previous diagnosis was incomplete," she stated, clinical and precise. "Your initial trauma recovery was complex, but there's no physiological evidence of infertility. The original verdict appears to have been an assumption made without proper testing." Emil went utterly still. Tamsin watched emotions war across his face. Disbelief, anger at years of false certainty, and finally a dangerous spark of hope he seemed afraid to acknowledge. His hands shook as he gripped the desk edge. Tamsin moved to him without hesitation, sliding her arms around his waist. He turned into her embrace, burying his face in her hair as tremors of relief worked through his rigid frame. "Breathe," she murmured, holding him steady. "Just breathe." By 7 p.m., they walked the fortress battlements together. The setting sun painted the sea in flames as they discussed the future taking shape. "Renata's already drafting incorporation papers," Emil said. "We'll establish legitimate business fronts, clean revenue streams, no more gray areas that leave us vulnerable." Tamsin nodded, watching waves crash against the cliffs below. "And Bianca?" "Her debts will be cleared, with resources to maintain independence. In exchange, she documents everything, All corruption, no matter whose. The city needs that sunlight. Speaking of sunlight, Tamsin paused at a Merlin, enjoying the salt breeze. Grayson's Guard Corps. I want protocols in place, recruitment standards, oversight, clear chains of command answering to both of us. Already discussed with him, he'll build it from the ground up with your security background as a foundation. They continued their circuit, hands linked, as darkness gathered. The fortress lights winked on one by one, creating a constellation of safety around them. Guards patrolled with renewed purpose, their loyalty secured by justice rather than fear. At 9:15 p.m., they retired to Emil's study where the sea pressed black against tall windows. The room held subtle changes. Tamsin's laptop beside his, her notes mixed with his files, 2 coffee cups on the desk. Small signs of shared space and shared purpose. Emil touched her cheek with careful fingers, tracing the fading bruise from the shipyard fight. Tamsin leaned into his palm, then drew him down for a kiss that held nothing back. Heat bloomed between them, slow and sure as sunrise. Their first time together unfolded with tender patience. Each touch was asked for and given freely, each barrier crossed by mutual desire. They learned each other by lamplight and whispers, by sighs and willing surrender. No power games, no dominance, just 2 people choosing trust and passion in equal measure. Near midnight, they lay tangled in Emil's bed, drowsy and sated. The sea's endless rhythm drifted through open windows, a lullaby of continuation. Tamsin traced idle patterns on Emil's chest while his fingers combed through her hair. Together, she murmured against his skin, "Whatever morning brings." His arms tightened around her. Together, he agreed, the word both promise and prayer. They drifted toward sleep, wrapped in shared warmth, the fortress secure around them. Outside, waves broke against ancient stone, stars wheeled overhead, and the city settled into its new shape, a shape they would face as one when dawn arrived. Time flowed like tide marks on the fortress walls, each week bringing the new order closer to solid ground. Summer faded to autumn, then winter, and finally spring bloomed again along the cliffs. Through it all, Emil and Tamsin built their shared vision with methodical care. Benedict's testimony proved crucial, delivered under heavy guard from an undisclosed location. His detailed accounts of Dragunov's operation helped dismantle the remaining corrupt networks. In exchange, he received exile rather than execution, allowed to vanish overseas with enough resources to start fresh, but banned forever from Valserano's shores. Bianca thrived in her new role as the city's watchdog. Her digital news platform, backed by clean grant money from the Corsini Foundation, quickly became the most trusted source for investigative reporting. She maintained editorial independence while working closely with regulators to expose remaining pockets of corruption. Renata orchestrated a masterful transition of the family's interests into legitimate channels. Shell companies emerged from shadows into daylight, properly registered and audited. Former gray market operations found legal homes under careful oversight. Each week brought new partnerships with legitimate businesses, expanding the Corsini influence through above-board channels. Grayson's recovery progressed from physical therapy to active duty. His knife wound healed clean thanks to Helene's care, leaving only a silver scar to mark the night everything changed. He threw himself into developing new security protocols, working alongside Tamsin to create training programs that emphasized protection over intimidation. Their Guard Corps grew steadily, recruiting veterans and law enforcement who valued order over violence. The fortress itself evolved, softening its edges without losing its strength. Gardens bloomed in courtyards where gunmen once stood watch. The war room became a command center for legitimate business operations. Even the stone walls seemed to breathe easier, as if relieved to shelter love instead of just power. On this late spring afternoon, sunlight poured through tall windows, painting warm squares across the nursery floor. At 4:45 p.m., Tamsin stood in the gentle glow, one hand resting on the slight curve of her belly, while the other held the antique rattle that once carried such menace. Now it was just a beautiful object, its silver filigree catching light as she placed it carefully in a display case. She traced the engraved date with her fingertip. The day Dragunov fell, when the old order crumbled and the new one could finally take root. Her heart fluttered with equal parts joy and terror at the life growing beneath her palm. The positive test last week had left her speechless, overwhelmed by the reality of their shared dream taking shape. Emil's footsteps echoed softly at 4:47 p.m. He moved with that lethal grace she'd come to love, but his expression held nothing but tenderness as he knelt before her. His broad palm covered her abdomen, warm through the thin fabric of her dress. this promise, he murmured. It used to haunt me, a child's innocent vow that seemed impossible. His voice roughened. Now it feels like destiny we chose together, step by step. Tamsin threaded her fingers through his dark hair. Not destiny, choice. We built this future, brick by brick. They spoke quietly of names drawn from both their histories, of security measures that would protect without suffocating, of their determination that this child would never become a bargaining chip in power games. The world outside can burn, Emile vowed, rising to draw her close. But this home stays sacred. Our family stays whole. She leaned into his strength, remembering the terrified girl who'd hidden behind crates, the wounded man who'd believed himself barren, and the path that had led them here. We protect what matters, she agreed. Everything else is negotiable. The fortress settled into evening rhythms as 6:10 p.m. approached. Their extended family gathered in the great stone hall, Renata elegant in charcoal silk, Helene still in surgical scrubs from her hospital shift, Bianca with ink-stained fingers from chasing leads, and Grayson moving slower but grinning wider than ever. Dinner felt like a celebration, though nothing special marked the date. They shared plates of fresh pasta and seafood while trading news and gentle teasing. Renata offered advice about morning sickness remedies. Helene promised to arrange the best prenatal care in the city. Bianca swore she'd document every milestone, off the record, of course. Grayson simply beamed, already planning security upgrades for the nursery. After the meals were cleared and the others dispersed to their evening routines, Emile led Tamsin to the wide balcony overlooking the city. The spring air carried salt and promise as lights began winking on across Valserano's sprawl. Time slowed to honey-thick peace as 7:02 p.m. arrived. The sea wind lifted Tamsin's hair, carrying away the last warmth of day. Emile's arms wrapped around her from behind. One hand splayed protectively over their growing child, while the other traced idle patterns on her arm. To the world, I stay lethal, he murmured against her temple. Gentle only with you, only here. Tamsin turned in his embrace, rising on tiptoe to brush his lips with hers. I never wanted you gentle to anyone else. Your strength keeps us safe. Your tenderness makes us whole. Together they watched the first stars pierce the darkening sky, twin guardians of the peace they'd fought to build. The fortress stood solid behind them, no longer just a stronghold, but truly a home. Below, the city carried on its endless rhythm, changed but breathing, wounded but healing.